Good afternoon and welcome to today's Planning Committee. This is not a public meeting, but a meeting which the public may attend. I'm Councillor Emma Muddyman-Rawlins, Vice Chair of the Planning Committee, and will be chairing the meeting today. Before we commence, I would like to outline the domestic arrangements for the meeting. We're not expecting a fire practice today. If the alarm sounds, please leave the building via the fire exit through the doors to my right, at the rear of the chamber. When you have left the chamber, proceed down the stairway and exit through the emergency exit on the ground floor. If there's anybody with mobility issues, please wait in the refuge area at the top of the stairs where emergency evacuation lift is located, and use the intercom situated to the left-hand side of the lift doors to call for assistance. The designated assembly point is in the public square in front of Cast, just beyond the fountain. I would like to inform members of the public and press at today's meeting will be audio and visually recorded. By entering the council chamber, you accept that you will be recorded and your images retained and broadcast on the council website and YouTube. If anyone intends to record or film any part of today's meeting, please ensure that this does not disturb the conduct of the meeting and that you only focus on recording the people participating. Please ensure that your mobile phones are switched to silent mode. May I remind anyone speaking in the meeting that you will need to press the large red button underneath the microphone and ensure that the red light is illuminated. This will ensure you are being recorded. The meeting's proceeding today on a basis that all members of the committee have read their agenda papers thoroughly and are aware of what we are considering today. If any members of the committee leave the chamber during consideration of an application, they should ensure that they do not take part in the vote on their return, as they will not have heard the relevant information on that particular item. Thank you. So item 1, apologies for absence. I've received apologies from the Chair, Councillor Susan Durant, Charlie Hogarth, Councillor Steve Cox, Councillor Amy Dixon, Councillor Duncan Anderson. Are there any other apologies? No. Okay, thank you. Item 2, exclusion of the public and press. There are no exemptions on today's agenda. So item 3, declarations of interest. Does anybody wish to declare an interest in an item of today's business? Councillor Iris Beach.
Only that the first application is within my ward, but I have had no input into it. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor. So please, you might need to fill out the information, Iris. Thank you. So item 4, minutes of the Planning Committee held on the 4th of March 2025. Can the minutes be moved with a true and accurate record? Thank you. Is that agreed? Yes. Thank you. Item 5 then, schedule of applications. Oh, sorry. So application number 1 is 24/01567/FUL. Is that right? Sorry, yeah. Erection of 5 residential dwellings following the demolition of the existing 2 dwellings on Rose Cottage, Broad Lane in Sykehouse School, DN14 9AU. Paul Barber, the planning officer, will introduce this item. Paul.
Thank you, Chair. I'm deputising for Paul today. It's fine, no one's told you probably. This application has been brought to Planning Committee because of the level of public interest, so there's been 11 representations, so 9 objections and 2 in support. We've got the planning agent, David Rowe, in attendance, who's down to speak, might be aware of just answering questions rather than actually speaking. He's advised me this morning. There's no other pre-committee amendments, and the application is recommended for approval. The site is located within the development limit of Sykehouse. It's designated as a defined village in the local plan, so it's within the residential policy area, and the principle of new housing is accepted as infilling in these village locations. The site currently contains 2 dwellings, several outbuildings and an area of hard standing. Historically, the site was occupied by a smithy or a forge and a residential property, along with some agricultural land. And then by the 1960s, a fuel filling station appeared. You can see it in the centre of the site. And the site has largely remained unchanged to the present day. I thought I'd just show the trees that are on site. The site is home to groupings of sort of self-set trees. These are mainly low value in amenity terms. T6 to the northeast part of the site is proposed to be removed, and therefore it will be a requirement of the landscaping scheme to replant at least 5 trees, so 1 per dwelling as mitigation. The only other tree of any amenity value is T4 to the southwest part of the site, adjacent to the neighbouring boundary. That's proposed to be retained and protected during construction with supervision, and that's secured by planning condition. This is a Google photo of the properties as they are currently on the site, and that's looking north towards the former Methodist chapel there, showing the sort of northern part of the site. This is the proposed layout. The design, scale, appearance of the properties continues a pattern of intensification on Broad Lane. So this form of infill is increasingly common in village locations to essentially build on densities and promote the efficient use of land. Whilst it does result in the net gain of 3 dwellings, the layout respects the sort of linear pattern of development that runs along Broad Lane. And just mentioned that on the plan there, you can see Cherry Garth, the left-hand side. That's sort of indicative of previously a sort of smaller property, then been replaced by larger property. This is the submitted street scene drawing demonstrating that density, that increase in density. But this is consistent, as I mentioned, with other approvals along Broad Lane. In terms of amenity, the dwellings have been positioned, you can see in the bottom right-hand part of the screen there, to avoid any overlooking or overshadowing, and the distance to adjacent residential properties is considered to be acceptable. The internal layouts meet nationally described space standards, and there is sufficient external amenity space as well. As I mentioned, there's been 9 representations, so I just thought I'd summarise these along with the relevant sections of the committee report. So with regard to flood risk and drainage, you can see an FRA has been submitted, and appropriate mitigation has been agreed with the Environment Agency. The sequential exceptions tests have been passed, and these emergency planning measures also in place. In terms of highways, there's been no objections from the highway officer. Each property, because it's a classified road, has its own access, on-site parking and turning area, so they can leave in forward gear. I mentioned there's been concerns with overdevelopment. Well, 15 dwellings per hectare is essentially what it works out to, is relatively low, but probably consistent with a village location, and it's not considered to be overdevelopment. I've mentioned loss and privacy and overlooking already, and also the proposals to mitigate against the loss of trees on the site. There's been objections based on water pressure, and it's mentioned in the report that this is a matter for Yorkshire Water, and the potential for remarked graves. So to summarise, there's been a contamination survey starting with a desktop study of the site, so that goes back to around 1856, and that shows the legacy of the uses on that site, and there's no indication of a burial ground on that during that period. The contamination survey was followed up, the desktop study was followed up by an intrusive investigation on site, and again, no contamination or other features were found. And I'll mention, as you may remember from the Armthorpe scheme, South Yorkshire Archaeological Service have been consulted, and we've had no comments back as yet. But if we refer to conditions 7 and 8 in the committee report, that talks about conditioning the continuation of that assessment of contamination or other factors on the site. The first part of the condition talks about archaeological remains or ancient monuments, and then condition 8 talks about any unexpected significant contamination or other factors found on the site. So these matters within the planning permission will give some surety that if there is any unexpected contamination or anything else found on the site, And I'll stress there isn't anything that indicates at this stage, and that's covered through planning conditions. So in summary, this is an appropriate infill scheme within a village to help sustain it. Technical requirements have been addressed and there's no consultee objections. Accordingly, the recommendation is to approve the application subject to those conditions. Thank you.
Thank you. Mr. David Rowe has requested to speak in support of the application. This is... No? Not here. Oh, right, okay. We'll scratch that bit then. So, do any of the we'll go into the debate. Do any members wish to ask or comment on the report with the planning case officer? Councillor John Mounsey.
Thank you, Chair. It's just, I did ask it to be brief. On page 15, 6.4, and also on page 18, 8.6, I wasn't quite sure, a bit confused, but when you look at the plan now, were they 4 or 5 bedrooms? Are these sort of some kind of smaller HMO? But I do believe they are family houses, is that correct? Yeah? The other one is on page 14, paragraph 5.9. Are we as planners about to take account of the guidelines in that paragraph? Because the shade is not quite come through yet as law, has it? So the guidelines of 5.9, they're saying, and I'm reading between the lines here, they're actually lawyers, do we take any cognizance of what that paragraph says as planners?
Sorry, which paragraph, Councillor? I didn't quite... So you just want some clarity on what that paragraph means in terms of the transitional guidance?
Are we in do not take any cognizance of that paragraph? Because it seems to me, yeah, there is stuff between the two.
Yeah, so originally the transitional developer guidance, so our supplementary planning guidance was drafted at some age, and it sort of brought together SPDs that were previously as part of the previous development plan. So essentially, we are producing new SPD guidance post-local plan to essentially supersede the transitional developer guidance. So although, as I say, as it says in the paragraph there, it should be treated as informal guidance, it has been used in the past, but essentially it's out of date at this point, so that's why we give it limited weight. And we are producing new SPDs in accordance with the local plan that are up to date in accordance with the adopted plan. But it does contain a lot of useful information when it comes to things like separation distances, replanting, drainage and that sort of thing. So we do still have regard to it, but that weight is limited because it's essentially out of date.
That's why I asked you, because really, for clarification, do we have to take account of that as it stands in that paragraph? Thank you.
Any other questions? Councillor Gary Stapleton.
Thank you, Chair. Obviously, there's a couple of things that just, for the record, it mentions that it's covered by the Burials Act 1857, when in actual fact it's not. I think the discussions have been had previously, and it's just for the record that it actually would be covered by the Disused Burial Grounds Amendment Act of 1981. So just for the record, that's what it would be covered under. I'd like to ask that I forgot what they call it now, informative is put on to make sure that we do check, to make sure that there is no burial grounds. There is potential that there is, because the Holy Trinity Church, which is in the village, is not considerably old. And then also, I think if you see where that car's parked, that's a Methodist chapel. Methodist chapels didn't always have cemeteries. It actually would be quite unusual to have a cemetery there. But it could well be that was a previous church grounds, which obviously then the use of the land the restrictions would still be there from when it was a church. So I think that needs to be looked at. But more importantly, the slight concern, not a big one, that we don't have an archaeology report to look at, given the historical importance and the fact that this is actually on this building is actually on the main road. So guarantee there's Viking stuff there, absolutely. So again, if we could have that put in, that there is an archaeological report is done and looked at before we allow any groundbreaking. As far as that's about the only thing I've got, really.
Thank you, Councillor Stapleton. Yes, we can absolutely include an informative that deals with the other legislation that the applicant would be bound by if permission is granted and they implement that permission. Not a problem at all to do that. And similarly, an additional condition can be added to deal with archaeology. So normally what we would require is a written statement of investigation that sets out what would need to happen in the event that any remains are found. So we can condition that, and what that would do is effectively link to the condition that Dave mentioned around pollution and ground contamination, so the two would probably kind of run in parallel, but we can absolutely include that as a separate condition.
Thank you for that. Is it possible, and I've got one of the questions coming to my head, is it possible that we can actually insist on it not being just a desktop? Because obviously, given the nature of where this is and the historical importance of this village and the fact it's on that main road, I think an actual boots on the ground, let's open up a few test pits would be a good idea. Secondly, one of the photos you put up there of the site, I don't know if you can pull them back up. There was one in particular that caught my eye as you whizzed through them. Which one? There was one, yeah, that one. Right. What I spotted was that sign, Rick's. Was this a petrol station at some point? And I mean, I've got vague memories of it being a petrol station. Would that mean that there's a subterranean tank? Did that come up as part of the pollution thing? That's absolutely fine. That was just because I'd read through then. I didn't spot anything about it. But if it's part of it, that's fine. Yeah. Thank you.
Yeah, just to clarify that, Councillor, roughly in the middle of the site where it says application site and pointing to that. Well, it says filling station there, it might be a bit of a giveaway, but essentially, yes, there's an underground fuel tank there that was, they've worked around that as part of the site investigation. They've tested samples across the site, but specifically in that location. There's nothing sort of immediately concerning in there. It appears to be contained, but that's been factored into the contamination assessment.
It's a pity the archaeologists can't investigate and find a few hundred gallons of fuel.
Chair, just to back up the question.
Yeah.
Has that tank been filled in, the petrol tank? If so, when?
I don't think it's been filled in. I don't know the exact sort of circumstances of what it's containing currently, but essentially as part of the site investigation condition, they've done part one, which is the desktop analysis, and that's clearly identified the historic uses on the site. This part two is the site investigation, and they've realised there's former fuel station there, so they've concentrated on site investigation in the central part of the site. What will now follow is a process of understanding, testing all the soil results, and then putting together a sort of verification plan and testing plan on how to remove the contaminants from the site. And that's the next part of the condition that they need to work from, on how to remediate the site, essentially.
So is that part of the conditions in the document we've got? It's in the conditions in here, yeah, the tank. Yeah? Thank you.
Any other questions? No? Is there a proposal to grant planning permission for this? Oh, thank you. Is there a mover? Thank you. I will move to a vote. Please indicating by raising your hands. For? Unanimous. Oh, yeah. So if we now move on to application 2, which is 23/2250/FUL, and that's the change of use of storage for grit. It's retrospective and proposed construction of a new grit storage unit in Mexborough Business Centre, College Road, Mexborough, S649JP. Susie Gross is the planning officer that will introduce this item. Susie?
Thank you, Chair. So yes, the application seeks full planning permission for the retention of a gritting, retention for the storage of grit and the erection of a new grit store in land at Mexborough Business Centre in College Road, Mexborough. The application's been brought to committee because it's been subjected to an objection by a neighbouring resident who's a staff member of the Development Directorate, and so in accordance with the delegation agreement it's being brought to committee. The recommendation is for approval. I don't have any registered speakers and there are no pre-committee amendments to report. So the site itself comprises about 0.39 hectares of land in the car park of the business centre. The business centre, you can see on the map there, is in the kind of southwest portion of the site. The car park is to the north and east. Access is taken from College Road at the south there. So the application red line development area is taken from the access to the north of the site, which is where the gritting operation is located. So the application is partially retrospective, and that's because the gritting operation has been going on for up to 5 years. It's been subject to contact by the planning enforcement team, which has led to the application being put in, and as well as the retention of the gritting use of the site, the grit store element is proposed. So it's partially retrospective, partially proposed. So just a few photos of the site. These are photos from January of this year, during a time when there was actually frost and snow. So it shows the gritting operation in use. So we have the grit, which are stored on an existing area of hard standing within the grounds of the business centre. To the left there you can see storage containers that are right next to it. In the background there you can see properties at Alexandra Road. And then a couple of pictures to the east and west of the application site. So that's the car park at the business centre and the offices at the business centre itself. So the proposed grit store, it's to be erected right against that rear fence of the car park there, in the same spot where the grit's currently being stored in the open. The scheme's been amended whilst we've been considering it to include a new acoustic fence, and that's going to go along the rear boundary that's shared with those residential properties. Operational hours are proposed as 7 AM to 9 PM, Monday to Sunday. These are the proposed grit store plans themselves. It's to be 7 metres by 6.8 metres, with a height of 2.4 metres immediately next to the residential boundary there, rising to 3 metres facing the business centre. And then likewise the acoustic fence, that's going to be 2.4 metres in height and approximately 14 metres in length. So the main planning considerations, the site's located in a residential policy area, and policy 10 permits non-residential uses provided these are acceptable in respect of impact on the neighbouring uses in terms of things like noise, disturbance, etc. And it's noise and disturbance which are the key considerations in terms of the principle here. We've had 5 representations from local residents, 3 of which have been objecting, and the main issues which have been raised are noise and disturbance, as well as to some extent loss of light. So yes, in terms of noise and disturbance, we did originally have an objection from the environmental health officer. The noise and vibrations of the kind of current operations, working early in the morning and late at night, wouldn't have been supported. and that led to the amendments to the scheme to include the acoustic fence to protect residents from that disturbance, as well as controls on the operating hours via a planning condition, so that no deliveries or other work is undertaken outside of those hours, so 7 a.m. to 9 p.m. And then subject to the acoustic fence being installed and those operational hours, the Environmental Health Officer withdrew his objection and was content to support the application. And then in other respects, in terms of neighbouring amenity, one resident objected that the store would overshadow his garden. However, the height that it is, 2.4 metres to 3 metres, and being essentially at the end of the garden, doesn't raise any significant concerns in this respect. Other issues to consider: impact on the character of the area. The proposed materials are timber boarding to the sides of the store. Likewise, the fence is to be tunnellised timber boarding. And whilst this is utilitarian in appearance, it's at the back of the business centre, and overall it's not considered to greatly impact the character of the area. There's no objections from the highways officer, who's recommended a condition just controlling the type of vehicle that's going to use the grit store to make sure there's suitable turning space for that vehicle. There's no loss of parking. And then other considerations such as drainage, ecology, trees, there's no objections. However, there will be a condition to require sustainable drainage to be installed at the site. So to conclude, the principle of the development, provided that noise can be satisfactorily mitigated, which we believe it can be, is acceptable, and it meets other policy requirements, and so the recommendation is to approve, subject to the conditions set out in the report. Thank you.
Thank you, Susie. So, committee members, we will now go into debate. Does any member wish to comment on the report or ask the planning officer any questions? Councillor Gary Stapleton.
Thank you, Chair. The overall thing I've got no issues with, but it's just for the purpose of debate and not wanting to just push something through without at least asking at least one question. One of the things, just for clarity, I think, for the public here is, and well, for myself as well, actually, the reason for the pause is an objection from a staff member of the Development Directorate. Can you explain a little bit more to me about what this Development Directorate is? And I'd also like to know why, bear in mind, every single one of us are named on anything we say or do with this. If we've got a member of the council, who's a council officer, he's putting an objection in because of their job, not because they live nearby, etc. Why are they not named in the report?
So to clarify, he is a local resident. He lives in one of the properties that bounds the site, and so he was commenting in that capacity and not in his official capacity. Do you want to add anything?
Thank you. Yeah, so we wouldn't normally name individual objectors in a report for GDPR reasons, protecting personal data. The Development Directorate that's cited there and cited in the scheme of delegation covers the planning service as a whole, so development management, technical support, policy and building control. What we're doing presently is thinking about whether or not the scheme of delegation needs some fine-tuning around the words to that. So I think the logic behind the words that are in the delegation at the moment are around making sure that there's transparent decision making, which is quite right. This officer doesn't have any role or responsibility in terms of planning decision making, so whether or not we can tighten up on the words to make that clearer going forward is something that we're looking at.
Thank you for that. My concern, I think it's fairly obvious here, that we've got clarification that his objection came because he lives nearby. But he does feel that there's an abuse of power or abuse of position, maybe that's too strong a word, but basically using the fact that they're a staff member of the Development Directorate is the reason this has been called in. And yet, if it was just an ordinary member of the public with an objection, that would not trigger a call-in on its own. But this has. So I think you're right. We do need to look at the planning delegation agreement. And I don't think that any one individual should be allowed to, just because of their job, to call in something that benefits them locally, if that makes sense, because that to me is a huge conflict of interest. And it's certainly something I don't think any elected official would be allowed to do. Thank you.
Just to clarify further, and absolutely we'll take that away and we'll have a look at what that needs to say. I think the purpose behind it saying what it does at present is to avoid a scenario where someone in the planning service objects to something and then we just make a decision that goes along with those objections. So it's actually making sure that there's a transparent process in place that deals with that. Absolutely take the point, and we can take that away and have a think about how that should work differently.
Thank you for that. And Chair, if you indulge me just 1 minute. Yeah, that's great, and I've got no issue with the answer. And this is probably going to be coming to a conclusion pretty shortly, and we're in period of debate. This potentially, for all of us, could be our very last planning meeting. And I'd like to take this opportunity to put on record every single one of you that I've worked with over the last 4 years, council officers, chair, I know she's not here, even vice chair, and every councillor, thank you very much. It's been an absolute blast, and hopefully we'll all be back here next year. But if not, thank you very much. Thanks all I want to say. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Stapleton. Is there any other questions or comments? Councillor John Mounty.
Thank you, Chair. I do believe we said there was 9 objections raised by the local public, yeah? Are any of these within the conditions provided in the document? Have they all been answered? Accepted?
Sorry, so just to clarify, there was a question about the number of objections.
Was it 9?
It was 5. Well, there were 5 representations. 3 of those were objecting. 2 of them were neither objecting nor supporting. They were just providing comments.
Am I right in assuming that if I read this right, this document, there's a second wave of correspondence with some of these people, is that right?
Yes.
What was the result of that? Outcome of that?
So the report, I've got a copy to hand. Excuse me. Okay, so the relevant section of the report is section 6. And then at 6.3 mentions the second round of publicity and advertisement, and we didn't receive any new representations to that. So all of the summarised objection points were to the first round.
And are they covered in the conditions there?
So the wording of the conditions weren't available at that point. So we compiled the conditions once the recommendation was being made. So the second round of consultation and publicity, that was on the amended plans, which included the acoustic fence and the slight change to the red line boundary.
Lastly, Chair, to follow up what Gary said, this is my first year in the plan. I've enjoyed every minute of it, but it's also my last. Because after 25 years as a councillor, I am retiring. But I'm following what Gary said. What your officers do, they recognise the hard work, what you go through and the struggle you get to get there, you know. I think you know credit to the council, because we as members sometimes don't always get right an idea. That's a fair comment to make, but I'm pretty proud of all my member colleagues here, every one of them. You know, but what you do is fantastic. You do a difficult job, but in a damn good way, and you're there for us when we need you. So once again, thank you to all of you. Keep on doing, keep the good work.
I'm not sure I can follow that. Thank you, Chair. It was just to say, Councillor Mounsey, the conditions that you see in the recommendation are a direct kind of response to those objections that we had from neighbours. So requiring the acoustic fence to be installed and the operating hours are to deal with the objections that we received.
Thank you. Any other questions? No? Do we have... is there any proposer for the planning permission? So Councillor John Mounsey, is there a seconder? Thank you, Councillor Stapleton. So we'll move on to a vote. Can we have an indication by raising your hands? For 4, please. Unanimous. Thank you. And moving on to item 6 is appeal decisions. So there's a report, it's for information only. Does any member wish to speak on this item? No. Can I ask the committee to, a committee member move the report to be noted? Thank you. Is that agreed? Thank you. So just before we do finish it, I know that Councillor Stapleton and Councillor Mounsey have kind of stolen my thunder, but I genuinely would like to thank all of the officers and the staff that work in the planning. Absolutely amazing. Thank you so much, and obviously for our panel members. Right. Thank you. So, ladies and gentlemen, that's the business of this meeting concludes. I would like to thank everybody for their attendance and input, and I now declare this meeting closed. No, I don't think we do.